Good evening. My name is Ken Heubusch, and I have the honor of introducing our guests tonight. But before I begin, I would like to welcome to the stage Max and Jordana Heubusch to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. I am honored tonight to be able to introduce to you two great Americans on the occasion of the release of a new thriller, The Shroud Conspiracy, by the Reagan Library's very own John Heubusch. Thank you. Before I get to John, I would like to say a few words about the man who will be interviewing him tonight, Gary Sinise. I have always marveled at his work and truly consider him a modern-day Spencer Tracy, an actor's actor. Most of us know him from his work on CSI and Criminal Minds, but I first saw him what I thought to be one of the most outstanding movies of all time, Of Mice and Men. If you haven't seen his version, which he also produced and directed, please find it and watch it. It is superb. Of course, his iconic role as Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump will stand for all time as a defining role, and I still, to this day, do not know how he got his legs back. His work, however, reaches far beyond the acting stage. Following 9/11, he became a strident supporter of first responders and many disabled American veterans organizations. He is a true patron of our wounded heroes and their families through his Lieutenant Dan Band, visiting troops around the world and supporting countless veteran organizations through the Gary Sinise Foundation. He is also an avid supporter of the Reagan Foundation and a dear friend of John's. That brings us to our guest of honor tonight, John Heubusch. That is in and of itself an anomaly because, as most of you know, John, as executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, is normally the man conducting the interviews of presidents, world leaders, and other dignitaries. Tonight, however, it is our turn to turn the tables upon him upon the release of his first novel, and he will sit in the chair of honor. First, some fun facts about John that you may not know. He has a long and distinguished career both in and out of politics. He served Elizabeth Dole at the American Red Cross and the Department of Labor. He served as the Chief Administrative Officer of Gateway Computers under his close friend Ted Waite, who we're happy to see is here tonight. Along with Ted and the Waite Institute, he spent 2007 organizing a deep-sea expedition to try and solve the mystery of the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and helped to lead a team to discover and authenticate the lost Gospel of Judas. I met John, however, under different circumstances. On May 13, 2013, he came to see me in my office and described some difficulty he had in swallowing. 2 days later, we had the answer: esophageal cancer. Many, including his surgeon at a world-famous university, said he shouldn't be here today. That was nearly 4 years ago. I am here to tell you he is standing up and fighting a winning battle over this cursed disease. Okay, so in his spare time, he wrote a page-turning thriller. In the spirit of Dan Brown and Michael Crichton, I have read an advanced copy of this book, and let me tell you, it is superb. Throughout my reading, I kept texting John, "Hey, John, I'm in chapter 8. You're not implying that, oh my goodness, chapter 11, you're not trying to, oh my goodness." And he said, just read on, just read on. It is a taut drama right up to the final sentence of the book. I cannot wait for the movie, and I guarantee you there will be one, and I'm happy to report he has already written the sequel. Through it all, he has shown the utmost perseverance, courage, and dignity that makes us all proud to call him our friend. Along with his fiery, beautiful Sicilian bride, Marcella, his amazing children, Max, Jordana, and Brock, we are proud to tell him we are all here tonight because we love him or we wanted an opportunity to meet Gary Sinise. Now we will hear about the Shroud Conspiracy.
Well, thanks, everyone. I just wanted you to know I have my Ronald Reagan tie on tonight, so just wanted to show you that. It's an honor to be here with John. John's a dear friend of mine, and when he told me he was writing a book, I was so excited about it, and then he asked me if I'd come tonight, and I am thrilled to be here for your launch of your first book. This is very, very special.
And I would like to say I am just proud to have my friend Gary Sinise here. I thought about how can I get a crowd. Invite a famous actor, and but I want to, before I forget at the tail end of this, to say, Gary, thanks so much for doing this. It's just such an honor to be on stage with such an incredible gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you. So as Ken said, I'm usually on this side and getting interviewed, so I'm going to do the best I can here. But I've read the book; it's outstanding. And John, you've had an incredible career. You've done so many things, and not the least of which is doing a superb job here at the Reagan Library. So many fans out here of yours for all of that work. But here you are now, an author of your first book. So let's start at the beginning. I got to ask you, where the idea come from? What made you want to take this on, write a book, and why'd you pick the subject matter of the Shroud?
Happy to. I wrote this book. Sorry.
Good.
When I was 17, high school senior, I went to a Catholic high school, O'Connell, in Arlington, Virginia, and I saw a documentary on the Shroud of Turin. And this documentary, as you can imagine, coming from the Catholic Church as it was, said that it took the position that the Shroud of Turin, the purported burial cloth of Jesus Christ, was real, and it was about a half an hour, and they went through a lot of facts to convince anyone watching that it was a true relic in the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I thought at the time that it was a remarkable topic. I wanted to know more about it, but life went on, and then over the next 20, 30 years, I would read in the newspapers, about every other year there'd be a controversy, and some scientists would say, look, it's fake, it's not real. They'd have some scientific test they said was conducted, and they just cast it aside as a fake relic. The church would always enjoin the battle and say, no, the science is wrong for all these various reasons. And so the controversy, Gary, has just occurred for many, many years as to whether it's real or it's not. And I was on, just as you said, Gary, this deep sea exploration with my good friend here, Ted Waite, for several weeks, and we were in the South Pacific, and believe me, there was not a lot to do. We were a long way from land, and I had a lot of time to think. And so when I was on board ship, I just started formulating an idea in my mind on what would it be like if you took a few characters and put them into the middle of this controversy that was all about the Shroud of Turin. And I decided to make one of the characters a really, really brilliant anthropologist who was an atheist and who believed in no faith and no God, and who was out to disprove this relic, the most famous and controversial relic of all time. And I wanted him to fall in love with a beautiful woman that was very devout and that held her faith very dear and saw the relic, the face of Jesus Christ on this cloth as being, very earnestly believing that this was the face of her Lord, Christ, and Savior. And I thought that would make for quite a relationship. And that's where the book kind of starts, and you learn a lot from there as to where it goes now. I had no experience. I can't believe I'm saying this in front of my publisher, Jonathan. I've got 35 years writing novels. No. I just thought, I'd never written a novel, and I never thought I could and would, and I never thought I had the patience or the stamina to write something as long as that and to stick with the plot. I just never thought I could do it. And just one night after I put these two beautiful kids to bed, sat down about 10 o'clock at night, and I wrote the first chapter in 4 hours, and I just kept at it each night until I had about 45 chapters in front of me and said, hey, there's a book.
So how long did that whole process take? What was the period of time that it
6
took to write
months.
the book?
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, some I can hear in the audience, some are like, oh my God, how could you do it that fast?
Yeah, that's incredible.
I didn't have anything to measure it against. I'd never written one before, so I didn't know how long it's supposed to take. So I just kind of.
Did you know where it was going to go?
I really didn't. I didn't have a clue, Gary. I didn't. I truly didn't. Sorry. Here's what I did. I sat down. I didn't really know where the plot was going, and then I got like about 22 chapters into it, and I thought, it felt like I was in the middle of a woods without any paths, without any way to get out. And I thought, how am I going to get out of this woods? And I thought to myself, maybe I should outline this book. So what I did is I took from where I was, and then I wrote an outline, and figured. I even copped out on figuring out an ending. I didn't have a great ending, so you have to buy the sequel to figure out what happens.
So remember this when you read the book, because it's incredible. First book, I'm just so amazed at your skill. And how'd you do your research? I mean, did you go to the Vatican? Did you spend time in the libraries there? What did you? You had to research a lot.
I did.
There's a lot going on in this book.
There is. There's a lot of research in this book, I've been to the Vatican and been on tours of the Vatican and been in St. Peter's, the Sistine Chapel. I've seen all that. That helped some, but I've never been in the Vatican's library, its secret library. You have to have a lot of special permission to do that. So I described somewhat of a notional Vatican library in the book. But much of this book takes place outside of the Vatican, and much of it is cities, places I've been to. I spent a fair amount of time in, so I thought I could describe them fairly well. And then I had two big terminals in front of me. One terminal was where the text was coming out when I hit the typewriter keys, and the other terminal was the internet. And frankly, the internet's obviously bigger than the Vatican Library. A lot of it might be apocryphal or false, but if you're halfway smart, you can figure out what's real and what's not. But I always had my research here and my writing there.
So the book went on sale today, and I would assume that most of you have not read the book unless you got here early this morning, and you're very fast readers. It's 400 pages. So just for everybody, for our sake, why don't you, without giving too much away here, we've talked a little bit about it, without giving too much away, why don't you kind of lead us a little bit, tell us a little bit about what the story is of the book and
Right.
where it goes.
As I was saying, there's if you take this fantastic, remarkable, it seems miraculous relic and look at it for starters, and if you want to believe what you see is real, when photography gets you up close to this image, you just have to be stunned. I mean, because if you do believe it's real, it is an extraordinary, it's not a photograph, but the photographs of it are just amazing to see. The face of Jesus Christ as represented by this cloth is, what's the right word? It just sets you back on your heels. It's kind of like you think if Christ himself came down before us, this looks kind of like what you, at least in my world, I would imagine this is what you might see. And so in that respect, it's an amazing visage. Because it's such a special item, there's so much that you can apply to it when you're writing a book. You can create people that believe in what they see, and there's people that can be, almost, they think that those that believe in this are laughable. And so it's an incredibly controversial relic with a lot of friction and people feeling one way or another about it. And so when you start to put characters to the middle of that stew, it just makes for a really interesting story. And in this story, you have this scientist who's just set at, he's a world famous figure who has disproved many other things that are relics of faith. And he's now out to kill the big one. This is one he's going to take on, and he's going to become a world-renowned figure as a result. And there's some people that are dead set against that happening. And they clash with each other in the early part of this novel. But he brings with him a team of scientists who are they maintain specialties that put them in a position to disprove this thing fast. And they don't disprove it fast. And so the book starts to take quite a turn. You can imagine this scientist who expects to have an easy win, 2-0 in the 9th inning, and it doesn't turn out that way. It's like 3-0, and he's in the 5th inning, and he's losing, and he doesn't know why. So there's some desperation starts to set in, and some of the fun parts of this book that take place in the back half that I don't want to let on about, they involve some very sophisticated science that would allow maybe things that sit on the cloth that's 2,000 years old to perhaps come to life again. And that's the best way I can put it without destroying the...
Characters are great, a lot of great characters in this. It's Dr. John Bondurant he's the central figure. He's the scientist who wants to disprove this. Then you've got Dominica, Joseph. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those two? We'll focus on those two, but there's a couple other important integral characters, and then there's kind of this tug of war that's going on between those two central characters because they're on the faith side, they're completely opposed to each other.
Yes.
Yet there's the chemistry thing that's going on.
Yeah.
A little something there.
Yeah, the opposites attract notion.
Yeah.
Kind of like me and Marcello. I don't know. Sorry. I tell you, something that's interested me thus far is a couple of reviews of the book. They were kind of like, yeah, it's okay. But one of the reasons a particular reviewer didn't like the book was he said that the characters, the chief protagonist in the story, Dr. John Bondurant, was not likable enough, is what he said. Okay. Well, and in some respects, I can see, I tried to make him somewhat likable, but one of the reasons you might find him not all that likable is that he's pugnacious. He's not just your average atheist. I mean, he wants the world to be atheistic, and he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He starts off with a chip on his shoulder, and he's really intelligent, and he knows it. You know, he's like one of those guys kind of a little too smart for his own good, and he's not necessarily a misanthrope. That would be a hater of mankind, but he's he's just smart, and he doesn't suffer fools gladly as a result, and that makes him all that not likable in the beginning. You start to like him a lot for reasons that take place in the book. He is, as you can imagine, with the character I just described for you, he's not the most sociable of fellows, and therefore he doesn't have the best pickup lines possible. And so he insults this woman at a conference, and he's enough of her and doesn't want to think of her again, except he happens to meet her in this book early on again, and he figures out who she is, and she's his boss. And that becomes a bit problematic because she is as devout as it gets. This is Dominica. And she's no suffers fool gladly person. She speaks 8 languages. She is as sharp as it gets, and she is his wit and then some. And so they get together, and well, throughout the book, they are just fire and water and oil. They just really go at it, and it was fun to write their relationship, and I hope you have fun reading about their relationship. So, those are the 2 main characters, and they get involved in adventures along the way that allow our protagonist, Dr. Bondurant, to redeem himself, and I promise you'll like him by the end. I promise.
No, you will. It's a very, very interesting dynamic there. I found would be fun to play, actually, as an actor.
There's an inside joke.
Are there any producers here? All right.
This is, I just have to let on. This is how I got Gary to do this. I told him he could be in the movie. Okay.
So there's Dr. Bondurant is hired to prove or disprove that the shroud is real. He assembles a great team of scientists from various backgrounds, various fields that are going to examine it from different perspectives. His perspective is that he has this one of the things that he does, he's got this special machine. So I'd like to actually read a little bit from the book, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
As if we didn't talk about that. Before I read this, maybe you could just tee up this scene a little bit.
I will.
Of where we're going to be, and this is actually the moment that I'm going to read here is the moment where he starts to do his particular work.
So before Gary reads this, to set the stage for you, you remember this Dr. Bondurant is a forensic anthropologist. There's a lot of things left in the course of history that they can study, but in this modern age with the shroud, the expertise he brings to the table is that he has developed a machine. This machine is kind of miraculous in and of itself. It allows someone to take a 2-dimensional image, something with height and width, and through the interplay of technology with Mylar film and projectors and cameras, he's able to make a three-dimensional image, a hologram of light of a figure. So now what he's done is taken the Shroud's image, flat as it is, and he's been able to make it three-dimensional out of light. And you can pass your hand through this image, and then you can play with the controls and make the flesh color tint just like flesh. And then essentially he can conduct a virtual autopsy of this body of light and do it of this figure that's thousands of years old. And so what he's done is he's all set to do this for the first time, and he wants to do it by himself, but he can't because this darned love interest of his has decided to sneak into the lab essentially and to get permission from him to look on. And he says, okay, sit down, and just watch me work. And that's what Gary's he's going to be reading you from that point forward.
I'll give it a try.
All right.
The ghostly three-dimensional image of a lifelike body wobbled back and forth, flickered, and disappeared entirely for a moment. Then it reappeared as quickly as it had left, only now it floated on its back. Dominica took a step backward and looked at Bondurant as though she stared at a ghost. The object came to rest no more than an inch off the light table, as though it rose from the fabric of the shroud itself. "Come forth," Bondurant said, deliberately echoing Jesus' command when he raised Lazarus from the dead. He looked about quickly to make sure no one could see or hear him from the glass-paneled observation room next door. "My God in heaven," Dominica said, "this is impossible. It's sheer genius." "I know," Bondurant said proudly. "Thank you." He was now actually glad Dominica had interrupted his special moment as it was an experience that had to be shared to be believed. He reached for the microphone on the headset that was connected to the recorder in his pocket. He could tell she wanted to say more, but he held his forefinger to his lips to silence her. He looked at the clock on the wall. "Wednesday, June 11th, 8:03 p.m., he said. His tone was sterile. "Forensic anthropologic observations of Shroud of Turin. Investigation of Dr. John Bondurant, subject examination through holography." Even Bondurant was stupefied at what he saw before him. Just as Segundo Pia had brought the figure of the shroud more fully to life for the world through his photographic negatives 100 years before, Bondurant had given the same image three-dimensional life through the modern-day technology of holography. While the hologram was only an illusion of light made possible by precision laser projectors and multiple sheets of delicate mylar-type film, it represented the most lifelike image ever seen of the man who appeared on the shroud. Bondurant passed his hand directly through the midsection of the glowing blue-green light before him and adjusted the tint control on the console. He gently reached for Dominica's hand and had her place it alongside the image. He asked her to hold it there. He then returned to the control panel and carefully adjusted the skin color of the levitating apparition to match her own until it looked uncannily human. "You can move it now," he said, as he pointed to her hand. She hurriedly made the sign of the cross and stared at what was before her. Subject is male, approximately 5 feet, 7 inches, approximate weight 150 to 160 pounds, Bondurant said into his microphone. It took him only a moment to conclude that the three-dimensional figure that glowed before them revealed details of the image on the famous shroud never seen before. This is actually going to work, he thought. What once had been a flat, ghost-like figure of a man on cloth now stood out in bold relief and brought Bondurant's goal, an anthropological autopsy of refracted light, within reach. He knelt and stared intently up at the body bathed in light only inches from his face. He scanned the figure from head to toe. The image presented appears anatomically correct in all three dimensions, Bondurant said. He tried to mask his surprise. He pulled a small tape measure from his lab coat and leaned slightly over the body of light. "Hold this for me, will you?" he asked Dominica as he handed her one end of the tape. He measured various elements of the luminous figure from end to end and side to side. "I find the lengths of the extremities, both arms and legs, to be in correct proportion to one another. The same is true as well for the width of shoulders and thorax. Individuals' muscular and skeletal elements appear to dictate mid to late 30s in age." He leaned in and looked up at the several inches that separated the light table and the apparition that floated before him. He shook his head. Subject shows markings throughout that appear to be signs of a scourge, evidence of welts and indentations found on the neck, back, buttocks, and rear of legs. Dominica dropped to her knees beside Bondurant to see exactly what he was referring to. Then she held her hand to her heart and quietly began to cry. He saw tears stream down her face and, helpless, hadn't a clue what to do to console her. He placed a hand on her shoulder and squeezed it gently to comfort her, but felt instantly uncomfortable. He removed his hand quickly. Reluctantly, he left her on her knees, stood up, and peered closely at the hands of the hologram that rested on its abdomen. Then he turned toward the image's feet. He examined them at close range in silence for several minutes. There appeared to be large indentations in both the wrists and feet of the image. He took a step backward from the figure and folded his arms deep in thought. He reached again for his microphone. Individual was crucified, Bondurant concluded reluctantly. Opposite him, on the other side of the light table, he could hear Dominica whispering the Lord's Prayer. It's a good book. Go get it. So let's. Is this machine real? Where'd you get the? Is the machine is not real, right?
Yeah,
Or
this
where'd you get
machine
the idea?
is not real, but I noticed as I'm watching some shows that my terrific kids watch on TV. It's like a lot of technology that you think about in this day and age. It doesn't exist today, but it's right on the edge. We will see machines like this in the future. We're seeing a lot of holograms now, but I think we're going to see even more and more sophisticated ability to dream up three-dimensional images from all over. And so someday a machine like this will be real.
How did you're Catholic? How did your own faith play into the writing of the book? And what is the Catholic Church's official position on the shroud, and do you believe personally that it's real? 3 questions there. I don't know. Boom, boom, boom.
Yes, maybe. No.
Your own Catholic faith. How did it play in?
So I've born baptized Catholic and been Catholic my whole life, and went through Catholic schools, and it's what introduced me to the shroud in the first place. And I knew in choosing the subject matter of this book, I was, I'm not suggesting I was playing with fire, but I was certainly touching on a subject that's, it's a really sore subject with some and really controversial subject with many. And the Catholic Church, interestingly, it doesn't have, what they will tell you in Rome is that they'll say, we do not have an official position on the authenticity of the shroud. Meaning, when asked, they'll say, well, that's up for science to determine. Yet, I have no doubt that the most devout of Catholics find the shroud to be a venerated object that in their mind is really real. One indicator for you of the church and how they treat this is that while they won't say that they have an official position on the shroud, I noticed within 2 weeks of Pope Francis becoming Pope, he went to Turin and he knelt before the shroud and said prayers before the shroud. That's certainly, a nod that one would think that at the highest levels of the Catholic Church, it's believed to be a venerated relic that should be, extremely well protected. Now to the tough question. I've been involved in sciences in one way, shape, or form my whole life. I believe the image is real. I can't believe, and sometimes that I say that, but science hasn't disproven it. It might be trying to prove a negative. I realize that, but I'm sure hoping. Maybe that's the way I should put it. I'm sure hoping it's real, because I'd love to be living in a world and live a life where things like that can be real.
Wasn't there, years ago, there was some carbon dating tests or something like that suggested it may not be as old as...
Absolutely. In 1988, there were some very important tests that the church allowed to take place on the shroud. They subjected the fabric to carbon-14 carbon dating. And many people here, I'm sure, heard about C14 testing before. And in those tests, the scientists involved came forward with the opinion that the shroud was roughly between 800 and 1200 AD. So that fit the theory that the shroud was like a medieval forgery or a fake, and that's when it had been developed. And they also pointed out at the time that, listen, everybody needs to remember, that's right during the time frame when there's the first historical records stating that the shroud existed. So they saw 2 and 2 equal 4, and they said as much. An interesting fact came forward after these tests, and that is that the piece of fabric chosen by the scientists to test were of a patch on the shroud, not the actual shroud itself. The shroud had been battered about for many centuries, and as a result had tears and rips, and in fact had almost caught fire at some point when a church burned down where the shroud lay. And so it's been subjected to water and fire and wind and smoke and you name it. They pointed out that one of the patches that was used during fixing of the shroud is what they had carbon-14 tested, and as a result, they said that the carbon dating fit perfectly for when it was patched. It wasn't the actual shroud itself. And so, let the controversy continue.
So I guess I can reveal the DNA aspect of the plot. Because as they examine the shroud, they have to take little bits of it, of what would be considered the blood, and perform experiments on that, DNA experiments. So, and then there's another aspect of the plot that I guess I can reveal. Right?
Yeah.
It's a cloning aspect that's very, very interesting. So my question would be, would that part of the plot, DNA off the shroud, cloning, the potential for cloning with that DNA, is that part of the plot possible? Is that real? Could DNA from the shroud be used to clone Jesus Christ? And how would a human being actually be cloned? Is it?
First, in the book there's a real fight that takes place between some of the scientists to get a hold of what is blood on the shroud. There is blood on this religious relic. And there in the book, there's a chase to get it. And they just need microscopic bits in order to do the tests that they want to perform. So fast forward today, in this day and age, I was stunned by it as I was doing my research, but there are now 20 different animals in this world that have been cloned. And it's everything from fish to cats and dogs and mules and horses and cows and lambs and goats and, many, and I mean, when I say cloned, I mean successfully, perfectly cloned. And so one has to ask the question, and that is if these animals and these mammals of really complex organizational structures are able to be cloned, is it possible to clone a human being? And the answer is yes, it is possible. There's no question that it's scientifically possible. The reason it hasn't occurred is because mankind, to this point, has suggested that that would be an absurd thing to do. But that's the reason mankind has not cloned itself.
I could use about 10 clones of myself. We could get so much more done.
We could, I know. There's some interesting, really interesting questions you have to ask yourself if mankind decided to clone itself. Let's say, Gary, that you were cloned and that your clone was sitting here in the front row. Well, what if your clone wanted to clone himself? Or does he have to ask you for permission? It's just some interesting thing. And so I think mankind has said, hey, look, we don't know the answers to those questions. And we may never know them, so we may never clone mankind. I believe it may occur way after our lifetimes in this room, but I believe someday mankind probably will be cloned. And mankind at that time is going to have to answer some tough questions as to what the rules of the road are once that happens. In this book, there are some who are forced to answer the questions immediately. And the result of that is the sequel to this book. Which for the low, low price. Anyways.
Do you personally, is that something you would support? Or that science?
Well, so I'll try to be as responsible as I can in giving you the answer. At present, I wouldn't support it at all because I don't think that we're, as a people, that we're ready for it. I really don't. However, it is just incredibly fascinating to me, and I really don't see the world coming to an end if it is to occur someday, as long as we've carefully thought through how to manage it. And but think of some really tough questions you have to ask yourself. What if a couple lost a beautiful child, and here all they want to do is recreate this beautiful child, and you think to yourself, how can you possibly be against that? And then you think of, what are the ramifications of that? It raises, the most fundamental questions we have as a people. And so while I'm fascinated by what life would be like when it's real, I guess we're all a little bit lucky that it's not real just yet.
There is an organization in the book that very much is in favor of this, and they have certain beliefs. So there are antagonists and protagonists in the story. Can you, before I'm going to open it up to like a few questions before, but maybe just mention the villains a little bit in this story, because there's a cat and mouse going on here.
There are some villains in this book that are modeled after some villains in real life. There's a cult in this book, and they're called the Demonians in the book, and I won't give you their name in real life. In real life, they have a real name, and they believe in the concept of resurrection. Very much so, just like many in the Christian faith and other faiths. Except they believe that resurrection is made possible by science, and therefore it's cloning that creates the resurrection. So if you want to live forever, what mankind should do for you, what this religion will do for its followers, is it will take you on as a disciple and clone you, and you just stick around for many hundreds of years if you'd like through cloning. And that's the resurrection that's offered up. And like I say, interesting concept, but kind of crazy too. Yeah.
Well, I think we have a few moments, Kent, to take a couple of questions from the audience. We've obviously
asked for, there's a microphone that'll be passed around, and just wait till the microphone gets to you and address your questions. I see a young lady back here.
Hello, thank you. Where do I start? Did you find that in your researching, either for the book or at any point in your life when you were studying the Shroud, that you became highly emotional, learning about all there is to learn from the Shroud, including the details of the instruments that were used to torment Jesus in his final hours?
Yes, in the book, I try, just as, for example, as in the passage that Gary read so well, I tried to reach for those emotions that I think that I would feel if that kind of virtual autopsy were to take place in front of me. I had to say, when I see the Shroud and I look into it's one thing to stare at the body that's on the image on the Shroud itself, to see the actual scourge marks and the welts that are evident on the back and on the legs, the back of the legs of the body, to see where the crown of thorns are across the forehead, to see blood let from the abdomen. It's not easy to look at. For me, what happens is my eyes are always drawn to the face of the figure. And I can't, when I stare at it for a long time, because it just seems to be staring back at you in such a way that, it's, if you believe that what you're looking at is the image of Christ himself, that's a pretty special moment. So yeah, it reaches into your emotions, and it's going to make you feel some way, for sure.
I asked John if I could read that section because it really knocked me out when I read it, and I was very emotional when I read that. I was in Dominica's shoes at that point, and certainly in Bondurant's shoes of, he's fairly certain he's going to debunk everything, and now he's not so sure. But I was very emotional about it when I read it.
I think we have a question over here. This would be
gosh.
Jordana Heubusch.
This one's for you, Gary. I'm sure this
Is
one's
this
for
a
you.
Forrest Gump question?
Daddy, who is your big inspiration for this book?
Okay, what I'll do is I'll read you the inspiration. It says, "To the love of my life, to my mad and beautiful and soulful Sicilian, Marcella Sciattomio." And in Sicilian, Sciattomio, translated, means my breath. You know, so when someone is your breath, they're your very life. You know, and that's what she is to me.
John, besides Gary, if you had to cast this movie when it comes out, who would you choose to play the specific roles that you so beautifully outlined?
In the role of Dr. John Bondurant,
Feel free, go ahead.
I had to add, my wife Marcella has to help me answer this question, which will show you how objective I am about this. Marcella, I can't ever remember his name, but you remind me. Okay, so I saw like a younger, less weight on him, Russell Crowe type.
Less weight.
Yeah, no. I don't know how to say. Skinnier, I don't know, whatever you want to.
The old version.
Yeah. He's not as good a shape as Gary. And for the Dominica role, Marcella, what's her name? Carol Bucchi. Her name is, she's French. And man, when she was younger, she was Dominica. So it's hard out. I can't, I don't know. That's up to the producers, not me. But I'd want them to be really serious actors. I wouldn't, this is a serious, really enjoyable, but also in some respects a serious book.
We have a question in the back.
Did you experience any pushback from the church or any other organizations while you were doing your research? And if so, what happened?
Yeah.
You're still here.
Yeah, I'm here. No pushback at all. I didn't put myself in this position to get pushback, so maybe I will or I would. I will say something, I don't know, terribly strange occurred that I guess I just chalk it up to coincidence, but when I wrote, I've written the sequel, it's finished, it's before my good editors at Simon and Schuster. But so the sequel's written, but when I was writing the sequel, there's a character in the sequel, and this won't wreck the plot for you. This character in the sequel is a priest who totally unexpectedly learns that he has pancreatic cancer. Not a lot of people make it through pancreatic cancer. He plays a central and important role in the sequel. And I didn't know, but at the time I was writing about his care, and I was researching cancer a lot when I was writing this book, and I didn't know that at the very time I was researching it, that I had cancer inside of me. You know, I started going to bed at night thinking, you know, maybe I shouldn't have written about it. You know? Yeah, it was a strange kind of feeling, but you know, I didn't figure all that out until after I'd written it. But I'll let you know if I get some pushback. If I do get pushback, I'll be fine with it. The good news for the church is that, especially when you read the sequel, they come out looking really well. They're looking good in this. So.
Hi, John.
Hey.
I'm not going to embarrass you, I promise. I had the privilege of reading this book a couple years ago, probably after the first edit or something.
Yeah.
And I know you're very hesitant to speak of the second half of the book. The best part of it. Suspenseful, edge of your seat, past what you guys were going over, and I could not put it down. So I know he didn't want to talk about it, the suspense and keeping it secret. So you would buy the book. It was fantastic. Best
Great.
part of the book was the second half.
Thank you very much.
We have a docent from the Reagan Library.
When your manuscript reached a certain size, you approached a publisher. Was it difficult for them to accept the manuscript?
You know, before my good friends at Simon and Schuster decided they wanted to publish it, you know, it went before, like any manuscript, it went before a few agents who said, I really like this, but I don't want to touch it. And well, what does that mean? The criticisms that were leveled against the book were that it's too big, meaning that the topic is too big. It's just, I guess maybe as a motion picture, you know, this epic film or something that would be hard, you know, it cost you hundreds of millions to produce or something, and they just described it as being too much to try to tackle. The other criticism leveled, you know, wasn't at all about, it's, you know, that it looks at religion in, you know, on one light or another light. It was just, I know what it was. It's the Da Vinci Code excuse. And that is some agents and some publisher house type folks said, it's the Da Vinci Code all over again. It's been written about. It's old. Who cares? Get out of here. You know. Then I stopped and said, well, you know, he sold like 200 million books. I mean, if they liked that, maybe they might like this a little bit. You know. But you know, no, that was, you know, that just kind of why they threw it out. So. But then the brilliance of Simon and Schuster was like, you know, and hopefully the critics get proven wrong and I get proven right. We'll see.
In the back.
I'm a big fan of audiobooks. Are you having this read for the audio format?
I have to ask my publisher. I frankly don't understand the. It's in. I know it's in a form. Obviously, you can buy it as a book. You can download it. That's not an issue. And Frank, I don't know the science behind when someone decides that it's appropriate for an audiobook. The rights are still being shopped.
We've had an audition for 3 pages already.
Yeah.
To read it.
There you go.
In the front.
Yeah.
Governor Pete Wilson.
Hi, Governor. Governor Wilson, he's on our board of trustees at the Reagan Foundation, and it's an incredible board like that's allowed me to even to be both executive director and a writer at the same time. Thank you, Governor. Thank you for all your service.
Thank you, John. I think I can speak for all of the board in saying that we are tremendously proud of you. We marvel at your ability to continue doing as much as you do, and I must admit that I knew that you were writing this book, I think before most did. And I was astounded at the time, and you let Gail read a few chapters, and she was hooked. And so we congratulate you. We are delighted with your success and still marvel. I mean, the fact that you wrote that as quickly as you did. So my question is, how long did it take you to do the sequel? And was it easier or more difficult?
A great question. It was easier to write the sequel. It felt like the book wrote itself. Everything seemed to fall together easier. But I'll have to say, the hard part of writing a sequel, if you don't know what you're doing, and I didn't, is you ask yourself these fundamental questions that I think the real writers know how to handle it like that. And as you write a sequel, well, do you write it as a complete standalone book that you don't have to have read the first book in order to enjoy it? Or do you have to make accommodations in the book for all of the people? You have to make sure the books interconnect, but they also still have to stand on their own. And that's not easy to do. And I think that's actually where my editor at the Simon and Schuster was really helpful, because she really helped me ensure that the connections between the two books were made, but they weren't so overwhelming that they wasted your time in the sequel. That's the best way I can answer that.
Well, congratulations, and I'm sure this one will be a bestseller as well.
Great. Thanks, Governor.
I think we have time for one more question.
The scope of your novel is quite large. In terms of character, is there a particular character's point of view that you personally connect with most?
Wow. Yeah, and there's a wonderful character, and I don't care, I'll say. I mean, I really wrote this guy well. There's a priest in the book. He's there and a lot for comic relief, but he's also just a really wise guy. And his name was Father Parenti. Parenti, it's Italian, and it's my grandmother's maiden name. And she used to tell me stories about one of my great uncles who was chosen to be one of the papal guard back in the mid-1800s. And this fellow, when chosen to be one of the Swiss Guard defending the Pope, decided he didn't want to be such a guard. Well, they put him in a cell up to his water and knees until he died, This is the story of my great-grandparents. The name Parenti has always been important to me as a result. So I named this priest Father Parenti, and he is just this little wonderful guy who's a hunchback, and he's only about 4 feet tall, and he's such a gruesome figure, and that they squirrel him away, and they make him go to work in the Vatican's secret library where no one will ever see him, and all he does is get stuck with these terrible research tasks for years, and he's like, how can I get out of this prison? In this book, he gets out of the prison, and he has the time of his life. And it's just a great thing to see. I want to be that guy. That's the way I put it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to continue on with the book signing portion of the evening. I think on behalf of John and Gary, we thank everyone.
Yeah, if anybody would... Thank you. What Ken meant to say was, when you buy 10 copies of this upstairs, I would be delighted to sign them for you. And that's where I'm heading right now, up to the store to sign a book or two. And I want to say thank you to my great friend Gary for doing this. It's just a wonderful thing, Gary. I really appreciate it, and thanks so much for being here with all these nice people. Gary.
Come here, man.